Welcome to the Scottish Property Podcast. This is a show where we aim to educate, inspire and entertain through real life stories and interviews from people in the Scottish property community.
As always, thanks for listening and give us a follow on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Remember to join us at our monthly networking events on the first Wednesday of every month. Tickets are available on our website. So without further ado, we'll just cut straight into this week's podcast. Welcome back to another market update on the Scottish Property Podcast. I am delighted to have with me today Ricardo Giovanacci from Rosevale Lettings. Did I say it right?
That's right, spot on.
Brilliant.
Spot on.
That was good, mate. That was good. Stephen Clark in the studio as well. And obviously we do this every month. We're bringing you the latest news, events in the Scottish property market, keeping you updated with all the stats. And Stephen, this is for your benefit, really, as much as anyone.
It's for my benefit, yeah.
And obviously, Ricardo, you're a letting agent. Run a successful letting agency in Glasgow, manage 750 properties. So you've got your finger on the pulse as far as the PRS goes as well, which is a big talking point at the moment. Rising rents.
Yep.
Nobody can get the housing emergency that the Scottish government's just announced.
Yep. Everyone hates our landlords. We can do no good. We're the second biggest worst thing in the world, next to cancer.
Scumbags of the earth, parasites.
Yep. We just seem to breed them, and they do absolutely no good. So,
but don't worry. As well as that, we're going to be bringing in some positivity because Stephen always brings the positive stuff in. How you can make lots of money in property as well. So,
Don't know if I've got the positive spin this month. I'll have to try and think of one when you're
we knocked it out of you.
going through these news articles.
You must have some positives. All you've been doing this year is holidaying, so you're just back from Rome as well, looking quite bronzed.
I know
have to say as
the
well.
ginger glows in form. I didn't know there was a general election until I came back from Rome.
Well, we're going to tell you about that. So we're going to talk about obviously inflation, how that filters through into mortgage rates. We're going to talk about obviously general election announced. We're going to talk about the Scottish Government announcement of the housing emergency.
Yep.
We're going to touch on how that obviously reflects in the private rental market as well, house prices, and obviously the shortage of short-term lets through in Edinburgh for the upcoming Fringe Festival too. So let's get kicked.
Taylor Swift concert as well.
That has an impact. The Swiftie,
that's all we want to know about.
Yeah,
the Swiftie impact, the Swiftie effect. Let's get going then. So UK inflation rate is down to 2.3%, just about touching the Bank of England's target of 2%. So, God, this is a positive because obviously that impacts on mortgage interest rates, hopefully. But the Bank of England's still holding their Bank of England base rate at 5.25%. No change there. Some economists and experts were predicting that the bank were going to cut rates, come about now in June time. But now, obviously, with the election on the horizon in July, a lot of people now saying that won't come until August, where, they're predicted to start cutting rates, which will obviously be positive news for us.
Yeah. Hopefully try and get a bit more investment in, and people, you feel like every time we get past one hurdle, we're like, on to something else. And when you look back before, you used to look at things like, like Brexit or an independence vote, it feels like it was coming every 2, 3, 4 years. Now it feels like every 2, 3 weeks there's like something else.
We had that conversation last month on the market update, because when we started the market update, we thought this is going to be boring. You're going to be going over the same, like you say, the same stuff.
Yeah.
There's Brexit and it lasts for years, or there's independence that lasts for years.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got at least 1 or 2 new topics and something that's getting hit with every month.
Yeah.
For the last 7, 8 months we've been doing this.
I think in terms of mortgage rates, right, I think we've all just become quite comfortable now that we're looking at, for a company buy-to-let mortgage, we're really looking at that 5.5%, 6%, right? And that's really kind of just what we need to go on now.
Yep.
So I think this is becoming less of a thing. I mean, as long as they don't, they've been stagnant now. Bank of England base rate's been kind of stagnant for quite a while. They haven't been raising it. So as long as it doesn't go much higher than that 5.25% base, then I think
they got the result they wanted. They ramped it up quickly. They've held it, and its inflation has dropped to the target quite quickly. It feels like, and it's not went on and on. considering a year ago it was what, 11%.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this a lot. I still can't believe that it went from 0.1% up to 5.25%, and the way the mortgage interest rates have gone up drastically, and the fact that the housing market seems to be really unscathed.
Yeah.
That is a shock to me, and I think it is quite a lot to other people as well.
Yeah, I think if you look at like all the different patterns that happen, like in terms of like, look at like a sales market versus a rental market, they used to kind of sort of consciously they would swing opposite directions. They're now both moving in the same direction. Or even things like, do you remember when you used to go for mortgages and they would do like a stress test and say, if your mortgage jumps to that amount, whereas we found that over like a short period of time, like, you know, if you go back, I mean, I bought a house 18 months ago, literally at the worst time, like you could go, you know.
What was your mortgage rate for that?
Oh, I'm trying. Do you know the bank? So I need to dig out what one was.
Didn't you, mate?
I don't know about that, but I have to tell you.
Mortgages.
What are those? we had a case where the bank initially said they were going to lend X amount to us, and then they took 75% of that away in a 4 or 6 week window. And then at one point they said the mortgage reporting over we wouldn't even give you that on paper. We had like a real nightmare with the bank. And it's fine. We get there. We got it over the line. But you just need, like everything, so we need stability. And that's what you want in terms of like lending rates. So people know where they actually can do the sums, you know?
So obviously you're talking about that stability. You know, markets don't react well to uncertainty. And obviously we have a lot of uncertainty around all the political stuff and geopolitical stuff that's going on. But it does seem to be now that we are kind of getting to that point where people are just comfortable with those kind of higher rates now, and people are starting to move about, and sales are going. We've previously talked to estate agents where a lot of the bigger houses and higher value stuff was really kind of sticking, but that seems to be moving again.
You said that about the market instability, but that's all we've had for the last 4 years is market instability, and the housing market has just held up and continued to keep on growing from COVID to everything we've been getting hit with the last few years. It's just maintaining and growing.
I mean, if you're an investor, I mean, I always love to keep track of the news and see what's going on, right? But I do think there is an element of, you know, what you talk about quite a lot, Stephen, is you kind of get tied up with all this stuff, like, because there is always going to be something that puts you off buying, right? So there's always going to be a reason not to buy, but you need to look past that. Like you say, we all predicted that prices were going to crash during COVID, all the rest of it. As long as the numbers are still making sense, you're coming away with a couple of £300 a month cash flow in a buy to let. It's, for me, you know, I had a friend of mine recently who's just put one of his personal properties on the market, and he bought that in 2016 for 40 grand. It's now probably going to sell it for about 90. You know, capital growth as well over that time.
It's changing the tact as well. Like if your stress test doesn't kind of meet that risk appetite you've got with a 75% loan to value mortgage on a 6% mortgage, you're going to go, well, I'll pull that back. And we've got a guy in the group that's put a 50% loan to value on an HMO, and he was like, I flipped a property, I'm leaving 30 grand in it, but I'm happy with that stress test, and because the mortgage rates are so high, I'm just changing tact. Rather than going 75% on everything, I'm going to bring it down to 50%. So I think it's just changing tact and thinking about it differently now.
Interesting. That same pal of mine that's selling that property for 40 grand that he bought in 2016, I kind of joked with him. I says, oh, you wouldn't have made that in Bitcoin. And then one of the other guys in the WhatsApp chat, you would have. So I did the sums. I looked back, see if you invested 40k in Bitcoin in 2016, what do you think it'd be worth now? 40 grand.
Did he leverage the 40 grand?
He did leverage the 40 grand.
So he's only putting in 10 grand.
I bet for simplicity.
This is my properties or
let's just say it was a cash buy and it was 40k in. What do you think it would be worth in Bitcoin terms now? Guess.
340.
Oh, I mean, should we go 10 times sold? Like what? 400?
6 million?
No.
£6 million.
No.
So even if he just put 10 grand, then he would have done a whole lot better.
Wow.
So, I mean, now that it's, well, because obviously Bitcoin's rebounded again, right?
Yeah.
So it's like come right back up. But anyway, that's another thing. We're not
You've just turned off all the property investors listening to this podcast
Yeah.
to go and look at Bitcoin now.
They are. They're all waiting like crypto.
I just think for risk factor though, for risk factor property, you can't really go wrong.
Bricks and mortar, honestly.
Especially when there's a shortage. There is a housing
Yeah.
emergency.
Yeah.
Let's face it.
Yeah.
There's too few houses for too many people.
Yeah.
Rents are always going to go up, especially in the last couple of years. Anyway, we're trying to talk this up as letting agents, Ricardo.
Yeah, exactly, to get investment in. But I think the biggest thing you want to look at is, well, houses, I see this to people all the time. They don't say on the Monday we have a housing crisis. And they go, right, so on the Tuesday we agree we're going to build houses. We'll pick the land on the Wednesday. We'll build it on the Thursday and we'll sell it off on the Friday. It takes
10 years each day.
years, yeah. Almost sort of generational in terms of like sort of pre-planning ahead. So that's not going to change overnight. And, I get clients speaking to me all the time. Like we had, you go back to like 2007, 2008, you'd be loads of what we referred to in the industry as accidental landlords, people that had no interest in becoming a landlord, but they had to rent their property out because they had to upsize or even downsize. And again, so we've still got a lot of them hanging about, but they're now hitting a nice sweet spot that like 15 years down the line, they've chipped away at that mortgage. They can either sell it on and make a decent profit on it, or they're getting really strong rents right now. And when you're seeing more clients...
But they're getting taxed for it now because of Section 24.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, that makes it harder. But when I initially get into letting, 17 odd years ago, back then it was still perceived as like a long-term thing. Mm-hmm. Like when you spoke to people were buying it like as a replacement for pensions and things like that. So they were looking at that there and going, well, I'm going to sit in this for like 15, 20, 25 years, where I think there's been a lot of people a slight change in tact in terms of like, I want to buy as a short term.
That was one of the questions. So like obviously managing 750 properties, like how many have you lost through sale, say in the past like 3 months, or say to the start of the year?
So
in the last 6 months, say.
We probably have a drop off of maybe 4 or 5 a month.
These are people selling. These are landlords selling.
Going away. Like I'm taking it off for whatever reason that may be.
And does that tie into these headlines that you're seeing about this mass exodus of landlords selling up? So the accidentals are getting out if they don't want, if they see their opportunity to get out. I get that, right? Because let's just talk about that term, accidental landlord, as well for the listeners. So what does that actually mean?
So an accidental landlord is somebody who became a landlord with no intention initially to be a landlord. So they bought their house, own an occupier, I live in it. They live in their flat for 2 or 3 years, and work's taken them to London, it's taken them to New York, Tokyo, Milan, wherever, and they've had to go abroad. No interest in being a landlord, but they can't sustain holding on to their property. You also found in 2008 and 9, back then, there was things like developers had sites they couldn't sell. I mean, I remember, it would have been early 2009, we dealt with, was that Imagine Developments? And they just came in and handed us like 2 developments, like full sets of keys. And we just went to these sites and we would do like mass viewings and just have it online, and people would turn up, and we had like 14 or 15 flats. We would show people around. I mean, imagine getting that now. Someone just turn up and being like, hey, Rosevale, here's 20 flats. Go knock yourself out. And in the current climate, I mean...
That was the boom days.
It was.
But let's bring it back to the current day, right? So, obviously, I just don't see the mass exodus. Like similar to you, it is the kind of single property landlords. Bear in mind, though, it's an interesting stat: 95% of registered landlords only have one property.
Yeah. So the ones you were saying that you both mentioned, like you're kind of 4 or 5 dropping a month.
Yep.
How many investors are you coming in that are buying and adding each month? Are you seeing more stock coming into you monthly from the more experienced investors who are maybe buying in a portfolio and scaling up?
They tend to be a bit more savvy, Stephen, in terms of how they're buying. So they're, so again, we're seeing more of those kind of single landlords that are moving away and living, whereas the buy-to-let investors, they're not daft. They're not just going to throw money. And at the moment, there's a lack of housing stock. They're having to compete at closing dates. And that's something, you know, when I'm going out and looking at stock, you know, with clients and investors to say, let's look at this or look at that and do the numbers add up. But we're basing that on saying, looking at a flat, say a 1-bed flat in the West and a small 1-bed that maybe is valued at 145. And I'm saying, well, look, if you're going to have to buy it for 155, you know, that kind of price range. But then
6%
again,
ADS.
but then when you start adding everything else up, that's because they can't compete. They can't pay 15, 20 grand over a home report value
and pay all
because,
these fees.
yeah, and all the fees and over then on top of that. So that's when the numbers don't add up for them.
So I actually hold you there because you're talking about the West End properties and I'm talking West End Glasgow because I know that market, you know that market. Sorry, Stephen.
Just sit here, I'm on.
Just nod.
You can shout for the Aberdeen investors.
West End sounds good.
So, you know, are those properties above, say, 150 grand purchase price and you're buying with a 75% loan to value mortgage at 6%, are those properties still making sense from an investment point of view?
I'll be a calculator, guys.
Yeah. So, I don't think it's a bad investment. See if you're in it for the long term. So again, if you're doing it as a short term thing, then
what's that? The mortgage payment?
562 a month mortgage payment.
Well,
plus your lettings fees.
Plus your lettings fees.
Ricardo, you're 18% a month.
What would that? What would that rent for then?
Minimal.
What would this property rent for?
So what? We talking a one bed in the West End?
750, 800. Easily, all day, maybe 850.
Right, so you're £562 a month on just the mortgage interest payments.
Yeah. So you're not factor fees, you're not my fees. Add another couple of £100 onto that. Your insurance, probably another couple of £100. You're maybe a wee
762.
Say you're at 850 for a 1-bed,
and you're getting 850, 900 for rent. Well, there you go. Then that answers your question.
£85 a month cash flow.
Listen, we're shooting ourselves in the foot here as letting agents. But on the other hand, I can tell you that we have portfolio landlords that are investing heavily, and it's the stock around about the kind of 80 grand mark that's doing well. Rents have shot up. These areas are now predominant, areas which you probably wouldn't have looked at in the past because there's that squeeze in the housing market and the rental stock. Tenants are now looking outwards into these areas that weren't that popular before, and that's definitely making sense, and it's working for our landlords
massively. But that's like there's a ripple effect because there's only so much land and only so much property available in the market. Obviously, working from home will massively change that for people. I mean, we saw that in a shift in terms of like COVID. The amount of people who were working from home, so they needed extra space, so they want that extra bedroom because they want the home office, that that type of thing. It's not, we don't see it's really affected like the West End city centre market. It's not massively affected. The transient types that are coming into Glasgow, that are coming to work at like Barclays or Morgan Stanley, they're coming in, they just still want to be here. But in terms of those that are from Glasgow, maybe wanted to live like in the West End, like they've always wanted to live there and tick that box, rather than staying for like 5 years, 8 years, they'll do it for 2 or 3 years, and then they'll move back out more towards the suburbs.
I'm sure that'll apply to all cities around Scotland as well. So just looking at the headline stats from the ONS house price data then, just to give the listeners up to date, we look at these every month, and house prices in Scotland really motoring. The last data is for March 2024, obviously a lag effect. These are probably, by the time, sales are recorded through to the land registry, these are probably sales that happened, in like January or something like that. But 6.7% an annual price increase, which is well outdoing the rest of the country. 2.3% over the last month-to-month figures. You're saying that you're seeing that in local markets, Ricardo, in terms of like West End. Somebody said to me the other day, Southside and Glasgow, Shawlands, everyone's going to closing dates. The first-time buyers are in there. They're getting their extra deposits from their bank of mum and dad and all the rest of it. The money's still there. I don't know if it's still pent-up savings from COVID, who knows where the money's coming from, but there's money there and there's people buying. Yeah,
it's weird, isn't it? You think, again, going back to, if we look at back for rental prices, I never thought like the day would come for an £1,000 a month 1-bedroom flat. We're seeing that now. People and money, what used to be prime West End, it's rippled its way right across Merchant City and funneled its way right down into the south side now. You've just got like, it's so hard now, whatever you're trying to buy. And that's the question we always ask, where is all this money coming from? But then again, if you've, parents are retiring or they're getting towards retirement, they're probably seeing strong property prices. They're probably thinking, if I've got to help my kid out and give them 20, 30, 40 grand, like I might as well put it into bricks and mortar.
Those higher rents as well, because it is like literally people like that. God, well, yeah, if you are a parent and you're seeing these massive rent increases, like you said, £1,000 for a 1-bedroom flat, you're like, well, I'm going to give my kid the money to go and buy a flat so that they can literally pay mortgage payments of...
It's went back the way.
You're talking about mortgage payments there, £520 for that.
That's
interesting.
Mortgage. Imagine if it was
residential owner. So it's cheaper, definitely it's cheaper buying. Basically, what we're
but
saying.
It used to be the other way around. It used to be like it would for a while they were saying it makes so much sense to go and rent, and the like rental prices for a long time. So I think maybe just before when I started. So maybe again I used to get this from Stephen at Newton Property. He said to me, prices were stagnant from around 2000 and kind of the early noughties, maybe 2003, 4, 5.
You're talking rents
for about a 12-year window. And then I would say probably from around 2016, 17, we've had this like slowly, little bit by little bit. And then as we know, the last few years, they've just gone stratospheric. Stratospheric. I mean...
Average rent, this is again from the ONS. They do rent data as well, right? So I'm going to read you out here. Average rent for Scotland was £952 in April 2024, up 10% from a year earlier. The annual rise was lower than in the 12 months to March 2024, which was 10.5%. Scotland's annual inflation rate has been generally slowing since the record high annual rise of 11.8% in August 2023, which was the highest annual rise since the series began in since they started recording rents, basically, in 2012. Now, what we were saying there is if we look at it locally again as letting agents, I would definitely say there's been a drop-off in inquiries, which has kind of slowed that rent increase. Rents are still rising, don't get me wrong, but definitely at a slower rate compared to a year ago. I think that data is spot on in terms of what I'm seeing on the ground. What about you?
Same as you. We're seeing there's still an appetite for it. It just wasn't as ferocious as it had been.
I mean, it was ridiculous.
It's wild.
Last summer.
Yeah. I mean, sort of that June, July, by August, it was just, I mean, some properties were putting on, and we'd been seeing that historically before that for a good year or two prior to that, where certain properties were getting huge inquiry levels. We changed our operations hugely in terms of how we dealt with that. So up until, I remember the team coming to me in 2021, we moved over to an automated booking system because my team came to me, my 3 property managers, and like they were in tears. They were like, we're putting flats on and we're getting 150 queries for some flats for like say one flat in 24 hours. And they're looking at me going, we're a service-led business. How do we service that? And I'm looking at it as the guy that's meant to be there, the talisman at the top, going, how do we do that? And you can't. You can't. It's physically impossible. I mean, I still got a call. I bet you'll be the same. You get people phoning you and going, I can't get a flat, or a friend phones, or
people in tears.
Tears, and going, what do I do? And you've got no answer to that to say, but you've just got to have your eye on the ball because...
And be there first. Yeah.
And that's the fairest way to do it. And we aren't a first past the post system in terms of who we give the flat to. We're very much about tenant selection. And I say to all my clients, I would rather do 3 or 4 viewings to make sure we get you the perfect tenant, rather than just take the first person that wants it. Now, when in a really, really hot market, quite commonly, we're doing a viewing, we're getting 80 inquiries, 15 people turn up to the viewing, 12 of the 15 want it, and of those 12, 6 or 7 are good applicants, and you're going back to client going, you've got the pick of the bunch. And, that's great. But at the end of the day, that doesn't solve the problem that you've got not just the people that turned up for the viewing, you've got like of 80 people that inquired about it.
They're still looking for somewhere else.
There's 79 people that need a flat. So, that's a real difficult thing. And that's where people push blame on to say the letting agent. And you're going, I'm not the guy that makes the rules. I'm the guy that makes sure you cross your T's and dot your I's.
Yeah, you're not the one sitting with the stock of the flats or building or renting them. Yeah,
It's so difficult. And even sometimes we're saying to some clients, like, you know, if we have a 1-bed flat coming to the market and we've got one that's on already, we're just like, hold off, just let me get that one out of the way and just.
There are some people ripping the arse out of it, though, it's got to be said. So this is where, again, and we'll talk about this house in emergency, this is where it brings us into the spotlight as the bad, greedy landlords, right? It's the small minority that give us a bad name. So the other day, I was on a Facebook group and I was scrolling and I saw this, somebody had shared a flat for rent and it was in Hillington in Glasgow, cottage flat. Somebody put it on for 1,800 a month.
No.
And in the description, it said, in line with the local housing allowance. So just recently, LHA rates have increased and the price for a 4-bedroom in Glasgow is £1,800 a month. But it's like, who is actually going to be able to pay that? And, you know, to qualify for that 4-bedroom rate, it's very difficult to meet the criteria. So, you know, in reality, it's not really going to work out. Plus, I think one of the bedrooms, I think they'd probably divided it into 2. Like putting a partition wall down the middle, do you know what I mean? Just to try and get that 4-bedroom status. And I thought they're absolutely giving us a bad name. And in the comments in the Facebook group, it was like scumbag landlord, greedy landlords should be banned and all the rest of it. That's no helping us.
No, it's not at all. It's not at all. And it's trying to... You're doing your best you can to try and give the best possible image. And you can do that about how you position your brand and how you put everything out. I mean, I say to all of my clients, the market's price sensitive. I mean, you know, and that's when you're going to, it's not just about winning the business, how you want to get people on board that are similarly aligned to how you work. I mean, I know it. Like, people will phone me and go, hi, Ricardo, bought a flat. So what's your fees? I'm like, before they even tell me where the flat is, what they've got. And we slowly kind of like, you know, before like you dance about it a wee bit. Now I'm just like, look, do you want me to come and have a look at it? And if they're like, no, I just want to know your fees. I'm like, 15%. Because we're not going to get it anyway. And a huge part of what we do is we build it around, you know, each client. But but the market's so price sensitive. And if you get it wrong, you're wasting your own time. You're wasting the client's time. You're wasting the public's time, you know.
Again, this is where the government have shot themselves in the foot. Again,
massively.
Big mistake with the rent controls, because now we've got landlords coming to us, either new properties that they've bought or else ones that are coming up for relet, and they're like, we don't know where this is going to go with this government. We need to ramp this up, this rent. So we're getting pressure from the landlords to say, look, you need to put this on higher. I'm like basically saying, right, well, you know, market rate, you're going to be too high. There's a lot of choice for tenants at the moment. So I'm trying to manage that expectation, but I also appreciate, as a landlord and investor myself, that you need to manage that risk. And that's why we're going to come on to why the big build to rent developers are actually exiting the market and not even investing in Scotland because of this risk level. We as small time investors need to manage that risk as well, which means that we need to go at it in a higher rate to mitigate that risk. So I get it, but also we don't want to put too much political focus on us either, because we become the easy target.
See pre-rent controls, how many clients would come to you every year and say, I want my rent to go up?
Exactly.
A handful. Like I had a lot of landlords that would just take it on the chin and go, if I rent a flat out for, round numbers, £1,000 a month, if the market shifted to 1,200 quid in a 6-month window, a landlord will say, well, look, if I've got John Smith in here renting from me, I'll just take it on the chin that I'll take £1,000 a month for the next year and a half, because I'd rather a bit of stability and long term. And we say that to all of our clients.
I've mentioned this before. Like I never, there was tenants that I've had in for 7-8 years. I never put the rent up once. One went from £800 to £1,400 when the tenant changed over. I never put the rent up once. Why? Didn't want to rock the boat. Didn't need to be greedy. The minute the government interfered when they took the control away from us, like, I'm on this. I need to be on this. It's going to market rent, and as high as I'll push it.
So because you don't know when things are going to change, and it's amazing how the more shackles are put around you, and people don't like that. Nobody likes to be hemmed in. Nobody likes to be overly controlled. And like we were saying before, there's been so many changes over certainly in the last 10 years, and I've been super vocal about that. you have to clean up the Wild West. We can't just do what we like.
Absolutely. And we're all in that, I'm sure we're all in that camp. And I'm sure we all take pride in the properties that we're putting out and renting to people. I mean, I can go through my portfolio and say there's not one, if my wife put me out tomorrow, then there's no one flat that I wouldn't stay in. I would be happily staying in all of them for a bit of peace and quiet away from
getting out with kids, all that kind of stuff. But you find that it's the problem is it's not only is it changing, it's not helping with public perception, but it's changing landlords' mindsets. Yeah. And it's already tough enough as it is. And I get phone calls every week about it. And clients will say to me, what do you think, Ricardo? I'm like, well, look, let's dial it back. Give me your full story. What's your financial situation? What is it like? Are you making a loss every month? What are you doing? Do you like being a landlord now? Are you fed up with it now? Have you had enough of it? And we look at the whole bigger picture and say, right, here's what I would do. I mean, I had a client phone me a couple of weeks ago, he's chatting away, and he was like, I got offered this option to buy a friend's flat in Thornwood in the West End. And he was like, I just don't know. And I was like, give me your figures. And when he told me the purchase price, I was like, if you don't buy it, I'll buy it. And if I don't buy it, I've got 2 clients that will definitely buy it. And his mindset wasn't in the right place. Like, he wasn't willing to look at just the basic figures and everything else because he's so caught up with the news, legislative changes, like news, government stuff all the time. And that's a massive...
what's your actually interesting question, this? Over the last 10 years, or actually less than 10 years, to be honest, since we really started getting hammered with all this government legislation, what's been the biggest single thing? I know what mine's has been. What's been the biggest single thing that's kind of caused you, God, to think, have those thoughts, is this really worth it anymore? Or, the barriers?
I mean... in terms of like what government legislation, like what specifically has made it harder, probably, I don't know. See, when they brought in the PRT, there's real worry that like because it was going to be like month to month, we just thought about where landlords were at initially. Not thinking where were tenants going to be. Because a lot of them don't fully understand it. They just see it a rolling month to month. But I suppose every time that's the funny thing, we're so resilient. Every time we come across like a new bit of legislation, like, even the changes in the repairing standard recently, lead testing, all these things that come in.
Just adapt.
Yeah, just adapt all the time.
I think for me, it's definitely the Section 24.
Section 24.
I think in terms of losing that.
Section 24 for me has caused me a right fucking headache.
And that was that 2016 they brought in and staggered
in.
I think
and that was the Tory government.
I was going to say it was Tories that brought that in, because everyone complains about Tories, Labour's. I mean, you can dial it all the way back to see the right to buy, back under Thatcher. Yeah. So we've had so many rolls of the dice, and what you realise is that you can look at it 2 ways. The market is always going to change. Always. There's always going to be political influences, how they change, how we do things. One of the biggest things for letting agents is, people used to say to you back in the day, what's your USP? What's your USP? Well, we're so heavily governed now about the lease that we all pretty much produce almost the same lease. Like our PRT, we can put slight changes to that. But, we're so heavily governed now in how we do everything. Actually, now when it boils down to it, you're now more so than ever buying into the person. Like I listened to Vicky from Upload Abode. Brilliant. The effect that somebody can have when you're, like, my staff refer to, they all watch our TikToks.
Yeah.
And how personality more so now than ever. Like back in the day, it was all about high street brands, the Slater Hogg, the Loot, or, it's countrywide, the same people, but even the likes of all the big boys like Retty, Coram, Clyde, all these guys. These are the guys that we go up against as a boutique, operation.
You can compete with them and even blow them out of the water now because of the way it's changed.
Massively, because you can go and you can offer a wee bit different, or a real, like my tax, a hands-on approach, but we just have to just pivot and change all the time about what we do. But I find it makes it easier for me, because I go to meet all the new clients, because I can give the final say on it. So if we decide that we're going to do one thing for one client, we might not do that for the next client. And that's why it goes back to, like, to sit down with everybody, because everyone's different. We don't want to have that
Bringing it back to the news and the facts, another article that I pulled out here. Well, obviously, this was the big news event really of the past month was the fact that the Scottish government have now kind of surrendered to the fact that there is a housing emergency.
Yeah.
And was it a surprise? Absolutely not, because already I think 4 or 5 local authorities, I think Edinburgh,
Glasgow, Edinburgh,
Argyll and Bute, Fife, maybe, had all basically declared their own housing emergencies previously. Labour had already raised a motion a couple of years ago to say there was a housing emergency. But I mean, I just think that looking at the substance of this, and obviously the SNP holding their hands up and saying, right, we need to obviously address this issue now. For me, without coming out with that, it just doesn't mean anything without a plan of action.
100%.
And what is the plan? There's no substance to it. They're just like, it's a cry for help, if anything. And they're trying to blame the UK government. So they've come out and said that this is due to funding cuts from Westminster that we're in this position. That's not really helpful. You get your budget, you allocate it accordingly. They're now saying that the latest stats were that 200 million from the budget, a 26% cut to the budget in the past year alone has been taken away from affordable housing building. Yeah. So how's that going to help solve a housing emergency?
Not at all.
Do you know what I mean?
But even if you look one step beyond that, like they've got such a bad rep, the government, in terms of like if they say they're, in my opinion now, so I look at things like if the government say we're going to spend whatever, 100 million and something, they'll never deliver that for 100 million. Yeah. They're going to be at 120, 130, 140, 150. Look at the ferry fiasco and things like that. Fiasco. So when you know that now that they are incompetent, and that's the hardest bit, that people don't have faith anymore in terms of like
politicians.
You know, one of the biggest.
In general.
Right. So how do we solve this housing emergency then, guys? What's the ideas here? I mean, obviously. there's an obvious answer to it, but what is the answer?
Well, look at, I mean, obviously build more houses, but it's where the money comes, and we look at the build to rent stuff, that how much of that funding's pulled away. I went to the Arla Property Market Conference. I go every year, but was it 2 years ago? I listened to John Boyle. He for Retty. Sidebar. Frankie Boyle's brother.
Say this.
100%.
All right.
Yeah.
We need to get him on as a guest.
He is.
He does all the stats and the research reports and stuff like that.
Brilliant. And he was talking about things like that. Also, quick sidebar, really embarrassing thing. When I met him at that the Arla conference, I went on to LinkedIn the next day. And I wrote, I think this is the thing, what I was talking about at the Arla Property Market Conference. And I meant to write, like, it was lovely to meet you. It was a really interesting piece that you discussed. And I wrote a really uninteresting piece, and then people were start liking it. And I clicked on it, and I was like, John, no, you know what I meant.
The danger of social media.
Oh, danger of social media and just predictive text. But he's a really interesting guy to listen to. Now, these were things that they were talking about back then, about the effects of politics and Scotland being seen as, do the politicians think they're being a wee bit disruptive and rule breakers? But actually what you're causing is outside influences not wanting to invest. And here's the thing, if you look at headline figures, like Scotland and Glasgow and Edinburgh for the last few years have been leading in terms of growth. They are two cities that we should have been having global investment, people falling over themselves to want to invest. And we're not. Because there's so much.
While you're on that investment stuff, so obviously to invest, have a thriving economy, we need incentives, like to attract. We're doing the opposite.
So Section 24 takes that.
We're doing the opposite, scaring developers and investors away. So, talking about how we solve this crisis, and in the government's own publication, Housing to 2040 or something like that Nicola Sturgeon brought out, they talked about obviously getting to that 110,000 by 2000. They want to build 110,000 homes before 2032, right? Affordable homes. Part of that was going to be collaborating with the build to rent sector and attracting. And when we're talking about build to rent, we're talking about massive schemes on a big level. This is institutional money from hedge, pension funds and that. So Legal and General and all that. I think I've already done a scheme in Glasgow. There's a couple that have popped up. You'll see going across the Kingston Bridge down beside the Daily Record building. But again, I've got my thoughts on that as well, because that's not really solving the housing emergency. When we talk about this housing emergency, they're focused on solving homelessness, which is a serious issue. 10,000 children in Scotland at the moment, according to Shelter Scotland, in temporary accommodation, which is a serious social issue.
Huge, not knowing where you're just going to move your head over the next days or weeks.
Pension funds building big fancy apartments.
It's not
going to solve that, right? So they need to obviously
come up pressure off the bottom end of it, which might help the
people that are pushed in. The people that really shouldn't be in the PRS that are kind of pushed in because they can't get a council house. Obviously, it takes a wee bit of pressure off that. But some of the rents I was looking at in that scheme were pretty crazy, to be honest with you. So
you're right, it doesn't solve it, but I think all these things help from all angles. Not one thing is going to solve this housing crisis.
I pulled out an article. Sorry to interrupt. Just while we're on that build to rent, I pulled out an article. You'll know this area of land very well because it was right across the road from your offices at Newton Property in Cowcaddens. And this was just recently about Nissan Motors, Macklin Motors, Nissan. They had a bit of land in front of their car showroom, a 1.15 acre site, and in their latest accounts, they had sold that bit of land to a developer for build-to-rent housing scheme. And in their accounts, it said that the deal had not been completed as contractually anticipated due to the impact of recent legislative changes in Scotland imposing rent controls. So there you go. There's proof in the pudding that these build-to-rent developers are going elsewhere. They're probably investing in England. They're like, fuck Scotland. Because you can't put rents up. I
actually thought for a while, where it was becoming like a big thing and everyone was talking about doing these build-to-rents, I thought, are companies like mine going to go towards become extinct, or am I going to lose a huge part of my portfolio because the single landlords will escape the market and it'll be more like trying to get your hands on managing these big build to rent type developments? And it's amazing over a relatively short space of time that's just disappeared and kind of fallen away. And it's amazing how in short space of time, again, we're discussing this before, how the political landscape just changes everything, and there's, things are moving all the time and trends are moving and changing. So
I think they need to look at it, and I think it's time for the politicians to step aside.
Oh, massively. You've seen it. We always say solely, if I just solely look at having a housing minister. So Patrick Harvey's now gone. You imagine if you don't do your job, your company goes bust, right? And you're out of the game, that's you. So surely for every role like a housing minister, you want to pick somebody that's qualified.
Yep, absolutely. Very good point.
Because, would you in any other job, if you got a big high-powered, high-flying job, working for a big massive corporate, well, if you're crap, they just fire you, right?
So in my opinion, it totally aligns with what you say, right? They need to form this kind of national corporation, right? Which is independent from the government. They need to have people that know what they're doing. So ex-CEOs of house builders or something like that, right? That have retired, form this board or whatever. People who are successful in business, in the business community, that know how to raise funds, attract investors.
Actually spend money and know about the risk of investing in certain things and how you get it back. And they just spend money, and if they run out, they just get given more. I mean, imagine that was me.
Because the money is not coming from the public purse, that's for sure. They don't have the money to get to that level of house building to solve this. And it is as simple as, if you build more houses, the rents will come down and you will naturally get affordable housing. It's as simple as that. Even in places like Ireland and stuff like that, I was reading that, there's government grants available to just small-time developers like ourselves and investors to actually go and renovate old properties that are just lying there.
Do nothing.
There are grants available.
But you also stimulates the knock-on effect that you don't think about.
Trades getting used, materials getting used, coffee, everything.
And just that ripple effect, even things look at all these people working from home. They don't think about the impact that has on coffee shops, the restaurants, everything has that knock-on effect. But as always, you look within your little box, which is whatever you do, and I don't blame that. But you find that they need to do so much more in terms of stimulating people to get into it. And I love
But their biggest motivations for votes for gain. So they're doing it just
short term.
to get
so
elected.
short term.
And then they're trying to run a term. And then what would we say next time to get elected again?
Yeah, you imagine you had to see it out in terms of actually having to say that you do that, then you have to see it out for a 5-year window and be accountable to
20
that.
years time.
And that's why we become the football in the political football match when it comes to housing, because the landlord, private landlord.
You mentioned the housing the bill for it. Was it not 2040? Nicola Sturgeon brought it.
No.
Is she going to be there in 2040?
That's the strategy.
Yeah.
So she set the strategy out. She's got votes, she's got in power, but she's fucking no longer there.
Yeah, she's away.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, now that she's been fired, she'll still get paid a pretty penny by the bit. So reading was Hamza Yusuf, he gets...
The latest thing is the housing bill, which obviously Patrick Harvey had a lot to do with, and now he's gone. So, how much does that hold now going through Parliament?
He's away. Things like EP changes and EPCs, like the amount of landlords that would come to me and go, how the heck am I going to find the money to make an old tenement?
How's it even possible? A lot of times.
And again, it's just, I'm sure it's all initially been thought out, like with good intentions, but like everything is good. We all have good intentions, but actually, what does it cost to implement that?
The reality of the situation.
If you listen to the Go Radio Business Show, Willie Hockey, who's very kind of big business figure in Glasgow, he talks about it a lot because he was building houses, or he is building houses down the Gobbles and that for, I think it's mid-market rent he's going for.
Yep.
But, he was like, there's a reluctance from the government. By the way, he's a politician as well. There's a reluctance from the government to get people who actually know what they're doing around the table to actually come up with the solutions. It's crazy how they don't do that in all sectors. But anyway,
they're not held accountable. Yeah, they're not accountable. Like you say, they're gone within a year or two. Gone. Next one.
But if you run your own business, and it's amazing how your mindset changes when you start running your own business. And a bit like in our industry, you're so led by the government to tell you what you can and can't do nowadays and everything else. Like, look at these things with these rent control officers that are coming in, like in terms of putting rents up and everything else. It'll be amazing to see actually how that's implemented long term and how it works. I was reading a wee bit about before coming today about looking at rent controls in New York and how that works, because that's like an interesting one. But then they had to change their tactics, so they brought it in the 60s, and by the time they got to the early noughties, I think it was, they then had this thing that once you got above like kind of sort of mid-market rent and went above what was seen as high end, those controls no longer existed once it became vacant. And then
again, it's like, see if you look back, you mentioned the 60s there. And again, if you get everybody around the table and, people from the likes of Shelter Scotland as well to try and solve this, lower end kind of homelessness issue and affordable housing. Shelter Scotland are saying that they need 53,000 affordable homes by 2026. So that is a big goal, right? But then you think, if you look at like the amount of money, because everyone's like, well, where does the money come from? That's the thing, right? We know we need to build more houses, but where do we get the money? Even if they have to get the extra funding from Westminster, or the next government who comes in at the next election says, right, we're going to make this a priority. It can be done because it was done back in the 60s. Post-war, they built, full towns like East Kilbride, all the new towns on a massive scale, social housing on a massive scale. So they can allocate funds to that and they can get the money. They just need to make it a priority. And then the reason why I get so angry about this is because the private landlords, the little individual guys like us, we're the easy targets.
Of course we are.
And we're getting used as we'll just cap rents on private landlords and that. And,
just sting the small guy would actually, they're the ones you want to stimulate. Because if you stimulate them enough, it's the guys that are able to make these decisions on like building big housing estates, and they go, do you know what? Scotland is somewhere that we want to be. But I felt for a few years there, we were on the right trajectory in terms of Glasgow and Edinburgh and these really like strong growth in terms of property. But we've just, like anything, we built a bit of momentum for a while, pissed it away.
So we've got the next general elections been announced. It was quite funny watching Rishi Sunak on the steps of 10 Downing Street getting absolutely pissed on. I don't know if you've seen the news clips.
Just get an umbrella, mate, honestly.
He got absolutely drenched to the tune of Things Can Only Get Better, which is the Labour soundtrack as well. So that was quite funny. But obviously that general election getting announced quite short term. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, who are you voting for in the election?
I think the Tories will go. I think that's pretty obvious. And it's funny when I've spoke to a few friends that are SNP supporters. They're not. I'm not aligned that way, but anyway,
they're not my friends, really.
But you're a Green. You're hanging out with Patrick Harvey, don't you?
Best mate. We're out there like flying kites, just doing like total green stuff,
eating avocado toast,
and just eating avocado toast, and just hanging out. And you find that I find a lot of SNP supporters. I know it's like the national election, but they were saying like because they know themselves that Labour's going to get in, and they're kind of humming and hawing, and you go, well, we need a change, and that's what I'm all for. Like, you get a run at it, you see it through. It's time for a change, and we'll see what comes with it. But
with that handkerchief sticking out your jacket pocket there, mate, you've got to be a Tory. You're definitely a Tory boy. Listen, I've actually voted for all the parties, right?
So
bar the Greens. I just think that there's not really that they're all sit round about the kind of same. There's not really much difference between them.
Well, you find none of them see it through, so that's the problem. So I'm from Greenock originally, Greenock boy, real like staunch kind of Labour town historically, and voted them, in my early days when I was younger. And then you get a bit older and you go, right, it's time for a change. And I know some people would be like, turn their noses up at that, but you need that. And I just want to make sure that whoever we put in does the right job. I think the biggest problem right now, more so than ever, and I know I can only look back in the last 20-ish years that I've been able to vote, that people just lost faith in politicians, full stop. I don't know now so more so than ever in the way that we live our lives now in terms of in such a digital world that people don't buy into every last thing, but they look at the proof in the pudding and go,
need to shake up. It does need
a couple of things to watch. Like, obviously, like Labour have announced that they'll put a windfall tax on energy companies making big profits from oil and gas. Yep. So I'm looking at Aberdeen.
I was thinking Aberdeen,
and I'm going because that's a big sort of Tory stronghold up there. I think the northeast. So if Labour, because obviously if we're looking at it from a general election, right, it's not going to really bother us too much up here in Scotland because even if there is a change of government, because we've got our own devolved housing agenda. But things like oil and gas, that's obviously governed from a national level. That could have a big impact on the local economy up there.
Could have a big impact on the Scottish economy in general.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm just thinking of, rental market demand and stuff like that. But anyway, let's see what happens. We've got enough problems to worry about in Scotland.
We do.
We'll let them do I mean, obviously I'm going to vote on that, but I just feel like it's a bit pointless, really.
I know. You've got no faith, faith in people seeing it through and yeah. Sometimes I just wake up and I think, God, I've got enough problems just having to deal with getting my wife and kids out the door and then the office, never mind anything else.
Tell me about it, mate. This morning I bundled them in the back of the car with their porridge. Eating the porridge on the way to school in the back of the car. You want to see the state of my car, by the way? What a mess. So I know the daily struggles, but I do find it all, I like it. I think it's the whole political stuff and all that. I find it quite drama. It's a bit of a pantomime and I follow it quite closely, but I know it's not everybody's cup of tea.
It's better than watching Slenders, I suppose.
Lastly, just to wrap up, there's always a good story about the short-term lets fiasco and how that again has been a government own goal and totally backfired on the short-term lets licensing. And again, this month I picked out an article from iNewspaper and they're talking about, there's now a black market developed in the Edinburgh short-term let. I'll read you out the stats here. Hang on a second, right at the end here. So in Edinburgh, right, which had 12,000 short-term lets, and obviously they host the Fringe, which is massive to the local economy as well. So out of 12,000, they've had 1,800 applications and only 135 have been granted.
because they don't have the resources.
So last month we talked about in the podcast that they're now Edinburgh Council are, would you call it, giving exemptions because they're panicking because of lack. But obviously you were saying about Taylor Swift as well, which obviously attracting
all those Swifties that come in and they can't get.
When is that concert? Is it June?
So I've just bought my wife tickets. I think it's June or July. I should have it ingrained. I'll have the 3 kids myself for a day, so like I should have it burned ingrained into my head.
Do you actually enjoy being a parent? No.
I mean, that's another podcast.
You go to work for a break. Anyway, getting back to the short term, let's.
You're looking at things like that. Like, I mean, that was always a big thing. I mean, my wife went to uni in Edinburgh, and she always said that during like their off season when they were away from uni. You could rent your place out and get, like, even for that small window of a few weeks, you could get like serious money. And it's like, we're saying about everything's just step backwards for like a bit of bureaucracy. And you're like, come on. And you feel like it's seedy, like referring it to like as a black market type thing. Because, my interpretation of that is like people selling guns, but it's hilarious. Like, that's where like. That's
what it is, because like somebody came on here saying that obviously there's people on Facebook now, and it's crazy rates. We're talking about usually a flat that would be like £62 a night. It's going for like £200 a night. I think that's quite still all right actually. But I'm
sure it was some of the hotel rooms as well. During the Fringe was up to like £450 a night. They just couldn't get any rooms.
I mean, that's when it was the cop. And it's always all the same thing that you shackle people too much.
Yeah.
They're going to find a way around it.
Yeah.
And it'll just then, when it's on the black market, people there's a risk involved and just charge more.
They're tinkering with these, small policies. And, Fiona Campbell from the chief executive of the Association of Scottish Self-Caterers comes on quite a lot, and talks about the issues that they're having, because they did a blanket effect for the whole. I mean, you were talking about little small-time bed and breakfast owners up in the Highlands of Scotland now. They've got to apply for this license and stuff like that. And I can understand, obviously, they're trying to impact to provide more housing for people so that it's not all short-term and profit-making. But really, they're so far away from actually solving the root problem.
Yeah, but it's not also, these people aren't making money that, renting somewhere out for a month and retiring off into the sunset and never working a day in their life. It's like a little bit of extra money. And it's all, I forever look at it as what does that stimulate in terms of everything else around it. But it's always so short-sighted to that. Mm-hmm. Should John be allowed to make X amount per day from renting a property out? Not thinking, well, if John makes his money, then somebody comes and stays, pays his taxes, but then they go on elsewhere and the person that's staying in John's flat.
Dinner, they go out for food, they go and visit restaurants, they go
knock on effect to everybody else.
Now all of a sudden the reputation will spread like wildfire over the whole of the world, saying that Edinburgh's extortionate, there's no point in going to Edinburgh, you can't go there unless you're fucking filthy rich because it's £500 a night for a hotel.
Brilliant. Ricardo, it's been a great conversation. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for contributing. It's great to get your opinions on stuff, and let us know about, quick summarise of your business. Where can people reach you? How can you help people out there?
Cool. So you can find us at rosevaleletting.co.uk. You'll have all our contact details there. You'll find us on Facebook. You'll find us on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn if you can manage to spell Giovanacci, but luckily there's not that many of us. So I would start with Rosevale first and work your way back from there.
I can say it, let alone spell it.
Yeah, listen, wife's in the same boat, so do not worry about it. Do not worry about it. It's a funny when people always say, Ricardo, can I get your email address? I'm like, no, please. Give me yours.
I'll email you.
Good stuff. So, excellent. And hopefully speak to you again shortly. Thanks again.
Cool. Very welcome. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.